Assessment has been one of them, and there are many, many others, including, for example, how we might organize from a point from Valdeck, I guess, about the dissemination of any policy document at whatever level it might be. There are requests for better definitions, tighter definitions, a better focus on some things, and the spheres of application. I think the big debate that we had across all of the things that we were doing is, are these guidelines relevant only to language teaching? Do they spill over into the wider educational context? And we're thinking about that because, of course, you cannot separate one from the other, and we wouldn't want to. And in fact, there's a request in the last group to remove all the divides and just have one set of flowing guidelines. I'll take the top 3 points, so please don't be offended if the points that you raised are not coming up now, for each of the 4 headers. So language teaching and learning, request for everything that people said positively, everything that people said they think will work, I am not going to comment on. You've got the handouts, you can read for yourself. So if I don't comment on it, that was agreed upon, people were happy with that bit. So a request for cross-curricular approach, a comment that a lot more investment might be needed, and not only in teacher training, but also in infrastructure. It's not a question of lack of resources, they believed, it's a question of how they're managed. Time and time again, we've been asked, remove the references to COVID. It's too COVID specific. Now, it came out of the COVID context, but we will remove most of them. This is to do with contingency planning. I don't want to say dealing with crises, but dealing with the unexpected, the unforeseen, and how you handle that. And we will do that. And then the alternative methodologies that might be needed. Looking at language learners, again, a plea for rewording to avoid ambiguity and references to context. A request for systematic approaches. Many requests about dissemination and making people aware, which goes back to the umbrella policy comment. And this is where I'd like to comment on. Many of the comments were transversal. They're coming up here and time again. A request for co-creation. Could we have simple standardized platforms on the software side, and many, many other things, and comments on training. For teachers, again, top comment is umbrella policy, and who decides, and can it be handled properly? Many, many comments on preparing and planning and overcoming setbacks and obstacles before the implementation stage. In other words, trying to foresee what the obstacles might be, rather than getting into implementation and then finding there are indeed obstacles. The need to identify who could be the teacher leaders, the leadership amongst the teaching community, and many requests for action research, particularly towards innovation and other things. I've missed the page. In terms of, I've missed the page. Yes, I have. Clever Peter, it's out of order. If you've been trying to follow it with the handout, you are thoroughly confused, but don't worry. Language learners, there was one other thing that I had to say on that, is that there was a big debate about online teaching and people saying that it does work and others saying the other. One comment I would like to make as a personal level, I think this is very level dependent, CFR level, age dependent, and dependent on cognitive capabilities. And then we'll leave it there, and you'll see why we're going to leave it there. Finally, in terms of wider educational literacy, the proof of concept, I think, has been very clearly established. There seems to be this demand for it. We don't know what to call it, and we don't know how to call it. So it's a question of redefining things. A metaphor came up using the wheel. And we've been at pains to remind people that we are not trying to reinvent the wheel at all. All we're saying, and we'll continue to use wheels on railway trains, relax, you will get home. But what we are saying is that the design of the wheel, the diameter of the wheel, what the wheel contains, how it functions, how it brakes, etc., may well change. The idea of planning, training for the future, and the implementation of that planning seems to be the key, and it seems that everybody agreed this was the right message and the right approach. But we are not interested in messaging, we're interested in content and practicality. It's all very well. We do not want slogans, we want practical guides. Two questions. Question one I've already approached, which is the relevance between language teaching and teaching generally. And what exactly, if we're looking for this educational literacy, what exactly do we mean by things that are being modified, so define what they are, and what might be new in the new context? And we're thinking of two things in general terms. One, that we may well have another major issue that we have to deal with. This has already come up with many of our colleagues, that it's no longer COVID, it's a refugee crisis because of the problems that we have in Ukraine. And they are not Ukraine problems in their origin. Let me say that from my point of view. Final thing is that there's been so much interest generated that I have begged Sarah at the end of today to make a comment. I don't think you want to make it now, or can we make it now? Okay. Sarah, ECML very kindly has offered to arrange and help us organize an online meeting where we can consider again in greater detail after reflection the whole issue of new educational policy. What do we mean by it? How are we going to enact it? How do we take it forward? The spheres of application. And what we asked for, and Sarah immediately agreed, was that it would be for everybody who wanted, who's here today, not just us and the expert group, but everybody who participated. And we'll let you know, I think that's a wonderful offer. Very, very happy to accept it. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, the ECML. And you're all welcome, as long as you're prepared to participate, give us input and work hard. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Chantal, could I ask you to feedback from your groups?
You're fine. It's going to be the feedback about the SMC workshop. And we had three main questions. The first one was about the impact of this workshop. The second one was about the factors that have influenced this impact. And the third one was, of course, about the future suggestions for further development. So I'm trying to be clear. The impact, one of the first things that was mentioned that it's important to focus on what is already done and to reassure people and teachers who tend to work alone, and then they feel less lonely because they know that they have colleagues and then they can rely on the colleagues. And this is also a second thing that came up, is the fact of connecting and networking and sharing. So this is one of the impacts that people mentioned. Sharing within a school sometimes, so people who never work together, because language teachers and teachers of other subjects, they talk together, but they don't share about professional issues together, but also sharing and networking and connecting between schools of one area. Also, we mentioned Belgium and Spain. I don't remember where she is, but yes, sharing above communities. So people who live in the same country, but never really work together, never really talk together. And all of a sudden they have this opportunity and it's not international, but still important. It's also putting together people who don't work together because they don't have the same role in education. So we have teachers, we had heads of school, we have teachers of minority languages, we have educators. We also had people from NGOs in some places. So this idea of pulling forces together was something that had impact. Also, policymakers and other stakeholders, local authorities, trying to make it as large as possible. Another thing that had an impact was the fact that it was a real experience of mediation during the workshop. So the people really experienced personally something. It was not just what I'm doing now, presenting something and just listening and reflecting, but it was really something that had to do with also sometimes with emotions. And yes. We also said that it was not present, well, the way of working had an impact because the way you teach is, the way you were taught is also the way you teach. So they said that there were a lot of discussions and that there were a lot of reflection, and this is what they would like to implement in the classes as well. Blocks were created. There were a tool about inclusion. I'm not sure whether I remember the name of the tool correctly, kind of inclusion somewhere. I think it was in Slovakia. Well, yeah, doesn't matter. Reform about Slovak as a second language. So also thinking in terms of policy. What does it mean to have the national language as a second language, and developing material, multiplying events organized within the country or organized within the school or within the region. And there was even an event organized by Erasmus+. One panel was devoted to multilingual classrooms. So this is, I think, about, there was also a snowball effect when people are involved in such a topic, they kind of contaminate other teachers, colleagues, people they meet. Now, the factors that make it successful, it's the choice of the people. So the fact that people, a good selection of participants. And here, apparently, it was said that it's important that we have people from different regions, different areas, different qualifications sometimes, because it makes the discussion richer and more interesting. And if necessary, some interpretation so that nobody feels left out because of the language. But sometimes it's also a way of showing how we can deal with multilingualism in a group. A lot of you mentioned also the idea of the whole school approach. So not only language specialists working on their own, not only subject specialists working on their own, but really pulling forces, the head of schools, policymakers, and all kinds of teachers. They also said that it was interesting that the experts were teachers themselves, so not researchers only. The choice of the venue was also important because if you stay together for 2 days and if you talk together and you eat together and you have informal conversations together over coffee or whatever, this is also part of the learning and yes, creating context and getting to know each other. Another factor that some of you mentioned that facilitated the impact is the fact that the event, that the teachers or the participants got credit for the events. So it made it appealing for the teachers involved, or it made it more appealing for the teachers involved. And our last questions was about suggestions for further development. And was one topic that came up several times. This is assessment, assessing language, assessing other subject, assessing the content, how to balance assessing language and the content, also assessing teachers' development, maybe. There was another suggestions about it's not only a question of content, it's also a question of well-being, and especially for children now coming from area where there is war. We think of the Ukraine, but we could also think of other countries. So, I mean, we also had other children or young people coming from countries where there was war. So taking this into account, not only focusing on, let's say, school subject, whether it be languages or other subjects. There was an idea of creating a network for participants. So not just a network of the participants in one country, in one workshop, but something larger. And the idea was maybe to start at regional level. By regional level, I mean several countries together, so not just one small region in one country. And then maybe make it bigger all over Europe. So all the participants who would like to join could join and share and discuss things. There was also the question of dissemination and what would be most interesting to do to disseminate the ideas of working in multilingual classrooms. And there were some discussions about, yes, writing an article, train colleagues, but there were different levels of dissemination. It depends on the goals, and so not one size fits all. So it's not because you write an article that you really have been disseminating the idea. And that it has been really implemented by other people. Involve also, we said that it was one of the factors that made it more efficient, but here some people mentioned also involve more decision makers, or involve not just only decisions maker, but don't forget them. And then leads to the fact that it could be interesting sometimes for two departments from one country to organize something together. So at this moment, they cannot do it. They have to choose one department or the other. Also, two countries doing something together. We heard from Slovakia and the Czech Republic, who face similar situations and who could do a workshop together. We also mentioned the role of parents and the importance of involving them, maybe in the workshop, but definitely in the process, yes. And at the end, we had something about maybe pre-workshops, blended way of working. So starting with something before the workshop and then going on using videos or whatever. And I think that's more or less. If I've forgotten something important, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And is it Jana? José is going to do it. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, as you remember, we worked from a SWOT analysis. So we heard about threats and opportunities and strengths and weaknesses. And we had lots of questions to ask, not just 3. And I'm going to try and group them together a bit, but I may not be able to do so. But the first and very important thing, and that is an opportunity, I think, is for the relang workshops, but I think for other workshops as well, that we can function as the sort of mediators between the teachers and the ministry. This is extremely important. We have contact with the ministry and we have contact with the teachers, and the teachers can tell us, look, we are handicapped by some things that the ministry wants us to do. The ministry can tell us what they expect the teachers to do, and we can sort of be mediators in that sense. And now that the companion volume has appeared with all of these mediation can-do statements, we can learn a lot from that as well. So that is important, and that is an opportunity to take on board. Then there is this point of the multiplier effect. Our workshops only have 25 people usually, and they come from different areas, but you know, it's these people then that have to sort of cascade what we have been learning. So some people said, look, an online workshop has a much larger public, and you might have a bigger multiplier effect. Yet lots of people said, yeah, but online workshops don't really work. People don't want to speak up in an online workshop, and there are all sorts of other issues there. Yet people have said, but can't you think of an online workshop in the coming year, so that those who cannot come to whatever place, that they can join a workshop on a particular subject. And I think we should have a look at that. We know now what it is like to organize online workshops. We know the disadvantages, but there is an opportunity, if you like, for us to reach a larger public. I would like to stress the fact that there is a representative of the Parent Association here, and it is so useful to have their opinion as well. And in our group, the representative emphasized that she thought that the emphasis should be more on formative assessment, not just on external assessment at the end of secondary school, that sort of thing, but that workshops should focus on formative assessment. And indeed, that's what the project is doing at the moment as well. If I may go down just a moment. We also found that in many countries there are language associations or teacher unions. And these language associations and teacher unions are so important in multiplying whatever we are working on in workshops. Because these language associations have papers, they have publications in which they publish on the workshops, they have all sorts of meetings in the country. So we should link up even more with language associations, not just in the countries that we know that they are. And the language associations sometimes organize, they're the local organizers, but we should always involve language associations and language teacher unions in the preparations of a workshop. This is very, very important. Then, and this was mentioned by the person who represented the SMC, there was this question, should the SMC also include assessment? And the Relang team has offered this before, and of course we didn't quite know what the SMC was exactly doing in the classroom, but certainly we would be ever so happy to join them in assessing whatever is needed to be assessed. And I come back to that in a moment, because the point is that some people have said, yeah, you're focusing so much on language, but education is much more than language. It's helping young people to develop into citizens that can work and live in Europe. That is true. Our answer has been, yeah, but we are here in a organization called the yes, you have to tell me. That's why I'm sitting next to the European. Sorry, the European Centre of Modern Languages, and of course there is much more than language in life. It's true, and we have emphasized that in the testing that we do, certainly when we are talking about mediation, but also when we are testing, for example, speaking and writing, we need to take into account that the student is a personality in himself, in herself, and that you can't expect from everyone to sort of be very easy in talking or whatever. You have to take into account that people differ, but yes, we focus on language, and that's what we are trained in, even though we realize that there is more in life than language. On the other hand, this is the ideal both of the Commission and of the Council of Europe, that through language you meet each other, you help each other, you enable each other to lead a happy life. There was talk earlier on about regional cooperation. This was mentioned in our groups as well. And it has happened in the Baltic area, where Poland and the Baltic states have got together and in fact are working together on developing their exams. They sometimes use each other's pupils to try out some of their tests. But a very important point was made in that connection, and that is the concept of human hours. We can ask all sorts of teachers to come and join us in a workshop, but there is such a thing as human hours. These teachers can't just sort of leave the school and then expect the school to replace them. They have other jobs to do, and we really need to look at this issue of the human hours. Teachers can't be expected to do everything. On the other hand, we can't expect the Commission and the ECML to organize for all of this, and money is not certainly the only way to solve all of this. The countries themselves should take the initiative of solving this problem as well. 1 minute, is that what you said? Okay. Then there was this issue of CLIL. Again, this is to do with the fact that language people, if you like, can only really talk about language in the first place. They don't know enough of the content. Yet, on the other hand, people have been saying, but teaching language in a CLIL situation is not just about language, it's about the content as well. So yes, but I must say the tradition is in the language teaching that we focus on the language and not so much on the content. Lastly, there was one remark by one of the participants, and he was very, I must say, proud of the ECML. He said that the ECML had been doing a very good thing in the past 10 years together with the Commission, and he was proud of relaying as well. 1 minute up.
It's a good note to end on.
Yeah, I thought so. Right, there you go.
Thank you very much, Zoe.
We now have a short coffee break, and then we're back for the panel discussion. If we can try to be back for past, because some people have got trains and other things. I have to give you the bad news that the chair of our governing board, Claire Extramiana, has been doing her very best to get here, but I'm afraid she's not going to make it. She got as far as Frankfurt and then delay, cancel, the usual, and is now trying to find her way back to Paris. Frankfurt has now been hit by snow, so things are a little bit tricky. That means, unfortunately for all of you, that I will be chairing the panel. But we're just very sorry that Claire can't be with us today. So coffee and back in for past, please. Thank you. I'm on. This is a rectangular table, but it's actually a round table, as you can see. It's an optical illusion. So welcome back, everybody. And the idea of our panel discussion is now to kind of think beyond the specifics of RELANG, SMC, the PNF initiative, the Summer Academy, and think about the future, ideas you have for the future. I'll just wait till we're silent. You all right, Mercy? If it's Santa, you can take the call. Otherwise, you can't. Okay. Okay. So we've gathered some questions from your comments in the group work. But before I ask my colleagues to answer those questions, I'm just going to ask them very quickly to introduce themselves and say who they represent. Pilar.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Pilla Põiklik. I'm from the Ministry of Education and Research in Estonia.
And you're our governing board member.
Yes, a long-time governing board member and a bureau member. Yes.
Hello, my name is Matthias von Gehlen. I come from Munich in Germany. I work with the Goethe Institute, and also starting from next year, I will be in the bureau.
I get the microphone. Yeah, it's working. Okay, my name is Bernd Rüschow. I'm a member of the Professional Network Forum and represent on that forum ILA, the International Association of Applied Linguistics. And I'm also part of the project team that coordinated and conducted the COVID survey on impacts and lessons to be learned for the future from that.
Thank you. My name is Rita Juknjavić, and I'm very sorry for my voice. It started disappearing. I represent RELANG here.
Hello, finally. I'm Terry Lamb, and I am one of the coordinators with Brigitte of Supporting Multilingual Classrooms. I'm also part of the Professional Network Forum as president of the Fédération Internationale des Professeurs de Langue Vivante. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Libor Stepanek, and I'm from Maastricht University in Brno in the Czech Republic. And here I'm representing CIRCLES, which is European Association of University Language Centers.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to throw out quite a challenging question to begin. Let's see who bites. Okay. How can we resolve the tension between a focus on language learning and teaching and a focus on wider educational issues? Can we? Should we? Well, that kept them quiet, didn't it? Finally. Oh, they're fighting now. Terry, no, Terry, you're first.
It feels a bit rude to contribute when I've not been here for very long in this thing. So I don't know what you've been discussing, but for me, I see language education and the way that we talk about it in Supporting Multilingual Classrooms as part of a very broad social justice agenda. So it's about diversity, inclusion, etc. And so the ways in which we think about a language's curriculum, I think we need to think very critically about it and about its origins. So we do talk about which languages we privilege, which we don't, and which ones have status and which don't. But I think there's a big movement developing in various parts of the world that we used to call social justice in the 1980s, but which is now being called decolonizing a curriculum, decolonizing schools, which is really about questioning the kind of content that we talk about as well. So I think there's room in here that crosses over disciplines and thinks about why we teach the things that we teach and what we exclude. but it needs a focus to really require of us to ask difficult questions about that. And I think that's important in languages with CLIL as well, for example. So we're teaching, we're thinking about the content. What is the canon? What is it that we accept as being okay, and what are we excluding? So I think that kind of is a very important contribution that we can make, because languages are very visible and audible, and I think at the heart of identity as well. So,
Thank you, Terry.
That's part of the bite that I was going to sort of chew on, which is perfect. No, because it dovetails quite nicely, because if you think about the fact that, for example, we talked about the companion volume quite often, but one of the key elements in the companion volume is that we should cherish the value of languages and language experience, talking about so-called plurilingual experiences and plurilingual repertoires. And that is something that we, as the language educational community, can communicate to the rest of the educational community, that the languages that their learners bring to the classroom are not a problem. They are potentially a contribution, they are helpful. And if that is something that we can sort of get across to teachers of other subjects, and also assist them in dealing with and handling, that is something that we, I think, as the language educational community can do. The other thing, I mean, we always talked about language sensitive education, getting subject teachers to appreciate that they're also language teachers, even if they're not teaching a foreign or a whatever language. That was the one thing. The second thing is also, which came out in the discussions that we had when talking about the COVID initiative, that a lot of the things that we learned within a language educational context in terms of interacting, communicating, handling online learning context, etc., is something that should be also discussed with colleagues in other subjects. And it might lead finally to a more cooperative kind of attitude at schools, because they're facing the same challenges. And as you said, language is at the heart of that. It's communication is at the heart of that. And a math teacher has to communicate in a Zoom space as effectively as a language teacher. So that's where the bridges are being built currently, I think.
Yeah, maybe another aspect, I don't know if it fits very well here to the question, but I think what's getting more important and needs a lot of thinking is actually in the illiberal context, and there's more of those coming up now, and we need to think about how to actually what is transported to the way of teaching in terms of our understanding of the political system, of what we perceive as how classroom interaction should actually happen. And it's getting important, because I think the language education is always much more than just the language. It's the way that the social interaction in the classroom is being defined, which of course in our sense is always a very open, a moderated atmosphere, but which does not apply to other political systems in other contexts. And so we need to think about what are the impacts. And I think then on the next level, when there will be also virtual spaces for teaching, this will become especially important, because those virtual spaces, they have to be designed, and they can be designed in a very restrictive way. So to say, to support maybe even restrictive societies, or it can be a very open platform. And I think it's important to think about how to find rules, of how to find guidelines, how to discuss these learning spaces.
Thank you. But it is a balancing act while we address the big picture and the big challenges. I really appreciated the comments from a previous section on the name of the center and also where our expertise lies. And when I think about our national context, I would say that language teachers, especially foreign language teachers, have a real hunger for something that is directed to them. And this is our main audience, so we must be careful about messaging because other centers and institutions will work on the big picture. So we have to find a sufficient slice where we deal with language-specific questions.
Thank you very much. Libor, from the higher education perspective, perhaps?
Maybe I'd like to add, and I was really happy to hear the word expertise, that there is something what happened to language centers at some universities at least, who were established originally mostly for teaching purposes, teaching students languages at universities. And these days, 20, 30 years after or later, we are now centers of language support to the university. And language courses are one thing, but very often we also teach soft skills, communication skills in other languages. We support teachers, academics, or even staff members in languages. And this is something where at many universities, language centers are respected. And it is for their insight into how languages work, because we can't forget that, of course, languages is our field. And when we talk to teachers of history or mathematics or chemistry, language is not their field. They might not be even interested, or they may feel they are not good at it. And if we offer this support, certain type of support, what can happen language-wise in their classes based on surveys and research and everything, it can be truly helpful to them. So.
Thank you very much. Would anyone in the audience like to add a comment? And microphone. I've just realized there isn't a roving one. Would anyone? We should be. We are. Yes. Did you want to add something? No, just that. Okay. Just checking the technical side of things. Actually, and that's my cue for my next question. Thinking about technology, because it's come up many times. What can we do to create a digital culture in our schools, in our universities, in our learning environments that really serves the interests of learners? And in that context, what are we doing about artificial intelligence? How is it going to, or might it affect what we do? Any takers? Oh.
We had a very brief discussion in one of the groups about how Google Translate or DeepL or any of those automated translation tools can make it better or worse for language assessment. And we may be afraid of those tools and say that these are sort of dangers and learners would be cheating or something. But I think we have to embrace the new developments, and we have to find ways how to incorporate them, to include them into contemporary assessment practices. Another thing about technologies, just before coming here, I had a class with my students at the university and asked them, what do you think the future of a language teacher, what's that? And the first response that came from many of them was, technologies is something that language teachers are afraid of. And when they think of a language teacher, I mean the young students, they think a language teacher is an old-fashioned lady, typically, I'm sorry that, yes, pen and pencil and then blackboard. I mean, very traditional, archaic image. And they say, if we can support language teachers, foreign language classrooms with new technologies, new equipment, new tools, that sort of make future look a bit brighter.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you talked about the traditional image. This is now coming from an old white man, you know, who's been dealing with technology for literally decades, since the early 80s. I think what we have at the moment is, again, a unique context, because in the past, there were motivated teachers who tried to benefit from the advantages and the added value that technology could bring to language teaching. But it was very individualistic. It was their own language teaching, their own classroom. And sometimes these teachers were looked at as, okay, that's the computer freak, that kind of thing. Now, through the pandemic, a lot of teachers, but also a lot of learners have experienced that there is potential for more flexibility. We keep using that word in the initiative, for more variety, for also more real world oriented kind of language learning contexts. And that really broadens the basis for arguing that educational institutions have the responsibility to provide that kind of infrastructure for their learners. And I mean provide, because it's not that, you know, you rely on the fact that kids happen to have a laptop and they bring it to school. The school needs to make sure that every kid has access to technology. And the school has to make sure that teachers get the proper training in working with such technology, et cetera, et cetera. But as I said, the ground has now been prepared because more people will listen to these arguments, because a lot more people will say, yes, I've done something like that and it worked quite nicely. And I find that doing an online, et cetera. And what you said about DeepL is quite interesting, because you can sort of turn the tables by saying, okay, why don't you translate the following texts with DeepL? And then we collaboratively look at the text and see where DeepL gets it wrong, and where you bring your human capacity to mediating something into the other language.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else? Terry?
Yeah, very briefly, just reminded me that a couple of weeks ago, I read an article in the Times Higher Education magazine that was saying that we should stop talking about digital learning. It wasn't that we should forget about technology. We need to keep thinking about technology, but to actually shift the focus onto blended. So we think about how and I know it's implicit in what you've been saying, but it will help us to kind of stop seeing it as digital separate from face-to-face, and focus really very much on what are the optimum conditions for blended learning. How can we use it in that way? Maybe something to think about going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Peter?
And I think it will have to start with taking stock of the last few years. Again, something that was commented earlier today from working on a luck basis or working on the basis of what you happen across, to working on a basis of a plan and preparation and then implementing and really trying to figure out what is it that we should be taking with us. But everything to do with language technology and AI, this is certainly something where the national level is so very important in also offering training for teachers, so that what barriers remain for them emotionally to make use of these tools, that they could be lowered and they could be really put to use. And it is certainly something that Estonia is really looking into in the coming years. How can we convince teachers, and what tools can we provide? And I think as soon as we can say, use this and it will save you so many hours in producing tests, in assessing them, then it will become much easier to get there.
Maybe just an observation from today. I found it very interesting that in many of the group discussions, the concept of mediation was mentioned. It came, it was a focus quite often in the discussions, and seems to be a very upcoming concept. And relating this to AI, I think the mediation tasks are something that I would estimate is really hard for AI to probably do, because it is a very complex a process which involves the cultural backgrounds, the catching the atmosphere in the room and translating these. So maybe this concept is even more important, thinking about how strong the AI certainly will get, but maybe this is a concept which still stays strong with human interaction and might stay like that for quite some time.
Anyone out there like to make a comment? Or yes, of course. Oh, it's coming.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. If I can just make a general comment.
Oh, I thought that was scarce. A temptation to fly it is one of those. It's a comment that is attributed to Christopher Columbus. I don't know if it's true, but someone, possibly him, said that the true explorer who finds new worlds is not he or she who actually finds the worlds, but he or she who sees the world through new eyes. And if that's true or partly true, and I think there are thousands of examples to suggest that it's true, using, if I can, it's okay, thank you. Using this does not make me old-fashioned. Not using this does. And if I cannot get that over, because it's how we use the technology. And I've seen wonderful applications done by very gentle, unassuming teachers who've been able to do hugely imaginative things. And thinking of the secondary school age, kids, believe me, they just love it. They respond. And the real magic wand that we have as teachers is not the wand of Harry Potter. It's this. Because with this, I can make you laugh, I can make you cry, I can write a poem, cause a revolution, get us to rethink. It's using our skills as human beings and getting technology to help us do it better, save time, do it more efficiently, and do it with efficacy. It's this that counts, and therefore training. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for those wise words. Oh, yes, Tatiana.
So basically, brief comment. You mentioned AI, and maybe some of you are familiar with ChatGPT and its capacity to generate text and actually maintain dialogue. So basically, now the question is, we used to worry about translation and automatic translations. Now, how do we embrace a new technology which is capable of creating a, Jose will forgive me, like a decent B1 text, yeah, on an everyday topic. So if you haven't tried to have a conversation with GPT, it's OpenAI. So do that, you'll be surprised, or ask it to write you a poem or an essay on a particular topic. So this is something, how do we make sure that it becomes our friend and it's not something that we will be competing with as teachers as well? Thank you.
And it's also, I mean, when you talked about sort of artificially created text, that adds to the portfolio of skills and awarenesses and agencies that learners need to develop, in the sense that they need a more critical discourse processing capability to understand that certain texts, and there are certain pointers that suggest that certain texts are not woman written, but they're just computer written, or they're just sort of bots that are sending out messages, etc. And that kind of critical reflective capacity is even more important, considering the kinds of information that some people spread using sort of technology to get messages processed and distributed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I would like to add that this is one of the things that we use for critical thinking mostly, that some of our students, they say, well, I don't even write emails now because I just, well, let it answer automatically. But what I struggle with is the beginning and the end. I don't know how to approach the person. I don't know if I want to approach a professor from a different university. So in our classes, we don't really deal with the content of the research, for example, they want to discuss, but how to approach, well, how to start, how to end, this type of thing. So really picking up the things, making it a friend, yeah.
Oh. Is that on? Yeah, it was brought up in one of our discussion groups by the parents representative that one of the issues is all the variety, that during lockdown, learners were asked to use this platform, or send stuff by email, communicate by email, etc. And it's also something that struck me in my own context, something I've been thinking about for decades, that there seems to be a lot of fear around for using one particular platform and for being open about it. Fear amongst teachers. If I put all my stuff onto the same platform as my colleagues, everybody's going to see it. It seems that there's fear on that level, but also when it comes to the school leaders, people who would be telling the teachers, you've got to do this, they don't seem to want to do that either. I mean, at my own institution, we have a Moodle platform, there's the OLAT at the university, but then some people say, oh, well, I use Google Docs or I use this or that. And I don't know if we really want to all use the same thing, or if it's something we should do and we're looking for a solution. So it's really just another question.
Thank you very much for that question, Christine. Is there anyone else? Yes.
Thank you. I would like to go a bit back to Sarah's statement about artificial intelligence. I would like to tell you that we had a license from the Ministry of Education of a new specialization, which is called computational linguistics. This is not just language teaching or digital skills teaching, but it is a master's program, first of all. So it supposes artificial intelligence, natural language processing, corpus building, etc., etc. I have a question. Do you think that the tasks, the tests, and the curriculum should be aligned with CFR standards or CFR, I don't know, speech activity descriptors, etc., concerning this new specialty? No, it is not just a digital skills.
The tasks in that study program?
Yeah.
The tasks in that study program? Well, it all depends on the aims of the study program. Do you really need to align it with the CFR? If you need.
Linguistics, artificial intelligence, computational linguistics, natural language processing, corpus building, and such things.
What you want to align is what language samples that you put into the corpora, or
the curriculum, the tests, the exams, etc.
If you want to have a common reference point, then yes, do align. There's no other basis to which to align. But first of all, ask yourself whether you really.
This is not a must, you mean? Okay.
But surely a lot of the program would be about the first language, language technology support for whatever language as the first language, which would have nothing to do with the descriptors.
No,
so
the language
is
English. The language is English.
But I mean, the descriptors are only relevant when you start talking about providing language technology support to language learning. But this is just one little aspect of what AI can do for languages. So there might be an option, but I think it would be just the one aspect.
Okay, let's continue for a moment on this theme of the digital world, but thinking more specifically now about assessment, because assessment came up everywhere, as in SMC, in RELANG, of course, in the PNF initiative, It was also discussed at the Summer Academy. And this whole question of assessment literacy, how do we ensure that learners and teachers can develop their skills in terms of assessment literacy? The question I have here is thinking about multilingual classrooms. How do we address the complex question of assessment in a multilingual environment? And can perhaps here technology come to our aid?
Okay, assessment is a very complex endeavor and it's very expensive. And for it to be valid and reliable, it's even more expensive in terms of human hours, in terms of input, in terms of anything. So if we have this decision that we need assessment in a multilingual class, we have to have a clear answer why, for what purpose, to obtain information about what? Learners' progress? Do we want to identify areas in which they need more support? Sort of formative assessment. So first of all, have a very clear statement of why you need the assessment. And then probably you will start thinking how to implement it. Because assessment is huge, enormous, expensive. Do you really need it? For what purpose?
To continue on that, of course, classrooms are plurilingual, and the plurilingual repertoires I mentioned earlier are something that could become and should become the basis for helping learners to apply these plurilingual repertoires and use the plurilingual repertoires they have to understand better, to not just understand language better, but also content. That's not just language learning, but in other subjects as well. And of course, assessment needs to take into account, if you set certain aims and say, we want to develop the plurilingual competencies, the plurilingual repertoires of the learners, you might also want to assess to what degree they apply these repertoires effectively or less effectively, and then feedback to the learners how they can improve on that. So it might broaden the scope of what assessment actually means. So not just pure language learning or whatever language production kind of output, but also the application of the linguistic faculties that the learners bring to the classroom.
Thank you. Terry?
Yeah, assessment is very, very complex. And of course, just to repeat, it depends on the purpose and why we're doing it. When I think about multilingual classrooms, it means very different things. So it could be quite simply trying to understand the plurilingualism that individuals bring to the classroom. And there we have tools such as the Common European Framework reference, the European Language Portfolio, those kinds of things. It can be a formative kind of assessment. So there are projects like descriptors and languages in subjects, which shows the kinds of competencies that people need to do certain tasks in different disciplines that can be used to inform planning, but it can also be used by teachers or learners as themselves to understand what they need to do and where they need to focus. I have a PhD student who's actually Russian-Ukrainian mix in Westminster, and her research is looking at Russian-speaking students in Westminster, and we have quite a few, and the ways in which they draw on their Russian to in the process of learning in the classroom and outside the classroom as well for other kinds of tasks. So this is, important in terms, it's a kind of assessment of their translanguaging capacity and the ways in which their home language supports their learning in the second language. So it just means many, many different things. But I think I know what people are really trying to get at with this question as well, because it comes up in our workshops, and it's something we probably need to think a lot more about, which is if you do have children for whom the first language, their home language, isn't the language of schooling, how can we do them justice? How can we assess what they know, what their skills are, when they can't demonstrate it through the language? You know, so we often do an activity which sort of shows them some typical rubrics about activities like, you know, read this and answer the 10 questions, or write an essay on this, and ask people to think about how they can test what the students have found out and what they know already. How can they do that using less language? You know, and so, but I think we need to do more in that kind of area, really. How can we do that? I mean, you know, in my university, there's a penalty. It's seen as plagiarism if students get their work proofread. And I just think, you know, this is not, doesn't make sense, because they, you know, some of them can't express themselves very clearly, and then we're going to mark them down on the language. So these are things that, the kinds of, you know, beliefs that people bring that need to be challenged. It's seen as bad if they do that. It's seen as some kind of, and if they, I've always encouraged students to swap their work with others and look and comment, seen as collusion, which is an academic offence. So this is yet another battle I'm going through in the university. It's not just mine, it's many universities. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we need to think about in terms of assessment and how people can be assessed when their language isn't the language of schooling.
Libor, did you want to?
Maybe I would add just two things from our university perspective and how teachers work there, because assessment is equally difficult there. And I would refer to Peter again with the training. So the teachers need to be getting training, and if we ask them to somehow get engaged in plurilingual repertoires and everything, so first they need to be trained and to understand why we do it and then what it actually means. And the second thing is, and it is a little bit more complicated, it is that was, I think, commented yesterday, or mentioned at least, that language also brings the culture. And we talk about languages, and for example, what happens at our universities, obviously, and I mentioned this critical thinking, what we mean is European critical thinking. And we can tell young adults that their essay is not logical because they don't structure it in an European traditional conventional way. And this message is absolutely terrible to them, because they think that they are doing something wrong. Not that they need to have a variation of critical thinking. Well, this is how we Europeans, for example, think. And you would be surprised how many continental students, young adults, are surprised that they hear for the first time that their essays in English are not wrong because, well, are not bad because of them being wrong, but because they simply apply continental writing style that they've been practicing in their secondary schools, elementary schools, everywhere. And they're surprised. And when I tell them, that they laugh, that when I say, okay, you use a lot of synonyms because you can't repeat the same word in the same thing. You use longer words because it is expression of blah, 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 which is opposite to the English style of writing. Oh, we never knew that we were doing it right, but in the wrong context. And these are the things that it is within Europe. And if we think of the Arabic origin, of the Asian origins, everything, this is even bigger differences. And this is a very difficult thing to get teachers to understand, that we have to be very sensitive what is wrong and what is another variety of even thinking behind language.
Thank you for that, because I just wanted to say that this was another example of what I said at the start about decolonizing our curriculum and our pedagogies. This is exactly Yeah, it's a brilliant example of that. You know, we know that in Arabic, you construct essays differently. You do in French than you do in England as well. I had to learn that when I was studying French. But, you know, students will suffer if, you know, if they do it in that way. So, and just to add another example of that, it's not really about assessment, but we also have places which don't accept references that have come from a language that wasn't English, yeah? And again, I mean, if I've got students who speak Arabic and they're talking about their work in Libya or Oman and learner autonomy, I want them to set, you know, I want them to find out what's been going on in their country. And I know stuff will have been written in English, but also in Arabic. And it's nonsense to not do that. So, you know, it's another example of decolonizing, but it's away from the assessment. But that whole assessment question is part of the decolonizing agenda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I understand the question about assessment. I know that it crops up, but I'm not a fan of it in terms of when it comes to these issues of plurilingualism, because it seems to me like the second step of a two-step process where the first step hasn't been taken. So I think it's more important to have this on the level of practices, something that you already started commenting on. And it feels strange for me to rush into how do we assess it when I don't think we practice it so well. So we should maybe direct the effort there first, unless we think that providing some kinds of forms of assessment will provide washback. And so it will become a stick for teachers to make them do things, but it seems like an odd roundabout way for me. So I think we should focus on practices first. And I think it kind of reproduces a misconception of the CFR as well, where the focus is on the third word in the title and people just glance over the first two. And it's slightly off balance for me.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to throw out the last, possibly one of the most complex questions. This concept of educational literacy that's come up in our discussions, what aspects do you believe are completely new, and what ones you think are there that we already do well, but perhaps require some modification? So what is completely new, or what new elements do you think there should be in this notion of a new educational literacy? And what ones, because I don't think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We already do some things well, but perhaps we need to modify them. Any takers?
Ooh, yeah. The new is relative in the sense that I think this idea, as it's work in progress, and the label itself is a label under construction, so to speak. It's to maybe create a more holistic approach to awareness as to the potentials, the limitations, the options that you have when you create a learning space. So it's more than just methodology and saying, okay, I want to use a digital tool and there are certain methodologies that do that well. But in addition to that, I need to always have to keep in mind, okay, how does that fit into the overall learning arrangement? How do I make sure that whatever I do is appropriate, combining various learning spaces? So it's not just looking at classroom practice, but it's looking at learning spaces and arranging and combining and merging learning spaces. So we know separately how to do things well, but putting them into perspective and aligning them in that sense is something that is important. And when we talked about the meal, oh, that was a Freudian slip, sorry about that. The wheel metaphor, the wheel metaphor, that's exactly the point, because as Peter said, the size of the wheel is different. The spokes that we have in there and how they connect and how they keep the tire properly central, etc., etc. That's what changes. So this thinking beyond just the individual classroom materials focused didactic approach, but considering a more integrated holistic image. That's the point.
Thank you very much, Bernd. Terry?
I'll try to be short because I wasn't here when educational literacies was being discussed. But what struck me when I heard that was it's old and new. Is my work and work that's going on across the world on learner autonomy, which is an old thing. It's about how learners can become better learners, how they understand, how to take responsibility for their learning, and the belief that they can learn, that they do have a capacity, but how to support that. So it's old, but in many contexts, it isn't there. And when I think about England, and I say specifically England, for example, we had much more of that in the noughties than we've had since 2010. And we see it in university students who don't know how to start to learn for themselves. So, that is part of educational literacy for me. It's what I call, developing a learner identity. So an identity is learners, learners who learn and who know how to learn, which is really important. And it connects with Bernd because in our field, we've developed work on space, place and autonomy. So spatial aspects of it, because autonomy is also about how, and it's not just about individuals, because as someone in Japan once said, we learn autonomy in groups through talking about our learning, and we develop our metacognition through talking about learning. But it's also, we have to understand there are always constraints on autonomy, and there's also affordances. And the spaces in which we learn, we need to learn how to make use of those. So that connects exactly with what you're talking about, I think, Bernd. I'll stop there in case it's totally irrelevant.
Not at all. And I think it also is a question of teacher autonomy too. And placing trust in teachers to know their learners and to respond appropriately. Yes.
Follow up on that, because that's the point. That's the idea of not just looking at isolated players in the classroom. And I use the classroom idea metaphorically, but considering the learners, considering the teachers being more aware of how they can handle challenges that have to do with diversity and heterogeneity, etc., etc. These are all challenges that, if looked at from a more holistic perspective, are maybe better addressed than just saying, okay, how can I provide a little bit of language support or learning support to someone who needs a bit more support to get to where I want them to get? So it's the grander picture.
Just a small comment. I think for the teachers, it's especially difficult to really catch up. I mean, maybe the educational concepts, they have not so much changed in general, but because the learning settings have changed. And so just for example, if before the pandemic, I was thinking like, if I'm walking around in the classroom, where should I stand and how should I face, how should I address the students? Now being in front of the computer, it's a whole different thing. I have to really rethink that. It might even need trainings like how to act in front of the camera. So it's not really a language related skill. It's a skill that comes with these new settings. And I know from many examples in universities, but also schools, that the pandemic has really been very stressful for teachers. Sometimes it was expected of them to be able to deal with these new settings, but the preparation time was short, and at that time there was also there were not that many support possibilities like we have it now. And yeah, since this is so important, and a lot of emphasis has been put on the learner as a social agent in the classroom. I think the teacher as a social agent that might need a special attention for teacher trainings, because for them it's a really huge task.
I think we're going to draw the panel discussion to a close, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all the people on the panel for answering some quite challenging questions. I think we probably could have gone on for a lot longer because there's still so much to talk about and still so much to do. But please join me in thanking everyone on the panel. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Susanna.
So first of all, apologies that you've been looking at my mask throughout the whole meeting. But I'm now happy to speak without the mask. Here comes the sun. And the sun is shining on a fertile ground and on solid, strong, efficient, adaptive, and capable individuals. It's a community, and this community has a measurable, well-documented, and sustainable impact, positive impact on regional, local, regional, national, European developments and beyond. I'm talking about the ECML, and I'm talking about the next program, which we are about to conceive. So let's have a quick look at my agenda. It's short and straightforward. I start with the context. I'll be just talking about another program. What is at stake, the process, what are the key steps we are taking when we conceive a new program? How do we identify needs and priorities, and in which direction are we going? What are the emerging themes? This will be the main part of this presentation. And I'll come back to the purpose as far as we know, or as far as we can see that at the moment. Is it just another program that we are looking at? I think that's an important moment or important consideration. If we look back, I'm looking back here 14 years, the year 2008, 2011, a program which was entitled or focusing on empowering language professionals, followed by 2 consecutive programs with a focus on the idea that there's no learning without languages. Languages are at the heart of learning. And then the current program, 2020 to 23, with an interesting keyword. Can you see the word that I'm pointing at? Change. Changing context. And I can assure you, when we conceived this program in 2019, we had no idea whatsoever how much context can change and what kind of impact that has on each and every one of us. So I think this word change is going to stay with us. And I think we even need to have a closer look at what that really means. So at the moment, we are really looking at a program that is still high up in the air, in the clouds. But this idea about change, and that change can actually mean crisis, continuing crisis, multiple crises. I think this is something that will have an impact on the way we conceive the new program and how it will look like. Now, what is at stake? Now, I don't want to scare you off, but I think we need to face this situation. We're looking at the war in Ukraine. The economic and environmental situation is not looking good. We are dealing with post-COVID severe effects with students and families. And democracy and the human rights situation, radicalization, the political situation is not looking too good. Now, how does language or language education come into play here? Is language education maybe far away on an island at a warmer place than here, where cocktails are being served on the beach? Probably not, I'm afraid to say. I would claim that languages and language education is right there, spot on. And this is what we need to look at. Language competences, the way we talk to each other, the way we negotiate with our neighbors across borders in Europe, is playing a key role when we want to solve these issues and we want to overcome these challenges. So I would claim language education is right there, and there's a huge responsibility also for the ECML to make sure that we are a player in the game and not somewhere on an island far away. Okay, so it's somehow hidden, yeah, thank you. This is, I thought that was quite enlightening or quite clear. The citation from a report actually of the Educational Committee of the Council of Europe. The education we offer today must reflect the kind of society we wish to build. And obviously we need to add the word language. The language education we offer today has to do with the kind of society we are building and supporting. Okay, so now I'm coming back to this question, what is at stake? For the overall framework, I have chosen what is being called the Penrose Triangle. Have you heard about that? A psychologist and a mathematician, they have created that. And they've claimed that this is the impossibility in its finest form. And I like that a lot. So yeah, I suggest at this stage that this is what we're looking at, the impossibility at its finest form. Of course, we need to keep innovation, but it's not just some more innovation. If you think of the, what I've just talked about, the challenges we are looking at, innovation is desperately needed. Innovation in language education really means a lot in this context. Changing context is not just, some more changes. It means really looking at ideas that can help overcoming these challenges. So I would even say that overcoming these multiple crises, innovation, if you think this through, may become a tool for survival in the long run. Now, Council of Europe, of course, we are looking at policies and structures and ways for cooperation the overall organization is offering us. We are clearly relying on this overall context, and we do our best, or we try to do the best with what we can, what is offered by the Council of Europe and our member states and their prioritized themes and the needs of language educational professionals are really bringing in their needs, and this is what we need to work with. Now here, just a brief overview of the key steps that we are taking throughout the years 2021 and 22. We had a consultation process with our key stakeholders, governing board, ECML consultants, national contact points, nominating authorities, and the wider network of ECML experts. We had a survey for our stakeholders, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And what we are looking at in the next year is a call for proposals where we are inviting experts across Europe, across ECML member states, to put forward a project proposal in the areas that will be defined in this call. The evaluation of the proposals will take place in September, and then it's just a month for evaluating all the proposals for the governing board in October to take decisions on the new program. Now, how do we identify needs and priorities? We are not reinventing the wheel. We are building on what works well with the ECML. You're probably very familiar with our thematic portals, the 9 cornerstones we're offering on our website, and we've been using throughout the previous years, bearing in mind, of course, that these are not standalone topics. Of course, they interrelate. Just take the topic of evaluation in web-based scenarios. Of course, this implies new media, and this implies evaluation. It would also look at teacher and learner competences, etc. But for us, it was very helpful to establish these thematic areas, and they work for us very, very well. Now, in the first bubble, you see the key topics that have been identified for the current program. In the middle, you see teacher competences, and in fact, all the projects that were selected for the current program, teacher competences in one way or another, they are dealt with. Now, the bubble below are adjectives or responses to the question, how should the ECML program be set up? In which way should it be delivered? What needs to be addressed? And you can see all the nice keywords starting from cutting edge, responsive, action-oriented, needs-based, collaborative, decompartmentalizing, a word I find difficult to pronounce and almost impossible to translate. Still, I think an idea, a notion to keep in mind. Also coming back to some of the things that have been mentioned now at the panel, that we need to overcome this thinking in, my subject and not yours, and bridging gaps between different areas, different educational stages, languages, and even with subjects. Now, initially, in the first rounds of negotiations with our stakeholders, we identified 3 major areas, and the topics are not new and not surprising for you. We are looking in developments in society at the post-pandemic phase. We need to take into account the increased migration arising from conflicts and how that impacts on educational scenarios. Artificial intelligence has been mentioned and discussed just here at the panel now. Sustainable development definitely is an area to address. How can we work within the ECML, within a 4-year program, yet try to produce products, resources that have a longer term life, that are relevant not only for 4 years, but only start being implemented after the running of a program. If you look at trends in education, a few examples: value-based curricula have been mentioned, transversal competences, 21st century skills, digital citizenship, and education for social integration. And with regard to Council of Europe developments, of course, the recommendation on the importance of plurilingual intercultural education for a democratic culture is going to be a key reference for our new program, the companion volume, but obviously also other areas of Council of Europe work, like linguistic integration of adult migrants, or what else have I forgotten? Yes, thank you. The reference framework for democratic culture. Thank you. Now, how do we go about the process in concrete terms? Based on all this input, we have conceived or devised a survey, an online survey on priorities in language education, based on the feedback that I've just presented. And we have offered this survey to 2 different target groups, the governing board, and by today we have 31 responses, and we are still hoping for 1 or 2 more countries to come in. And we've also addressed this survey to our network partners, PNF members and ECML experts, project team members, associate partners, training consultancy experts. Now, just as a reminder, sorry, this is again hidden. This survey is really a comprehensive survey. This is not only to identify priorities which would possibly put forward in the call for proposals, but it would also look at possible themes and topics for training and consultancy and wider public activities of the ECML within the next program. Now, in terms of structure of this survey, again, we are building on our 9 thematic portals, but we've added a strand on transversal competences and an overall strand looking at the recommendation and asking in which way, or would you as a user or contributor or potential proposer of a project, would you be interested in working on putting the policy into practice with regard to certain areas proposed in the recommendation? So this is the overall structure of the survey. And let's now look at initial results. What are the emerging themes? Now, I've identified here the top priorities of both target groups, governing board members and experts. And I've looked at percentages 70% and up. So this is really top. Both groups saying, yes, this is our top priority. And there are 3 areas mentioned here: developing teacher competences for diverse classrooms, the linguistic integration of vulnerable children in pre-primary education, and building communities of practice to ensure better collaboration. I think all 3 areas have been discussed in the course of this colloquium, hasn't it? Haven't they? Well. Diverse classrooms, obviously supporting multilingual classroom has a lot to offer here. Pre-primary education is maybe something that we need to put a stronger emphasis on. At the moment in our current program, we have only 1 project that is focusing on this sector, looking at how to better support vulnerable children. This need has been mentioned more than once in this colloquium, so definitely there's a need there. And the community building, communities for learning, communities of practice is also something that we are looking at, for example, in the context of the summer school, the summer academy. We had a pilot this summer, and definitely we will continue offering an ECML summer school. But this is just an example with a specific target group of teacher educators. But definitely communities of teachers, networks of teachers is something that we will probably bring in strongly in the call for proposals. As an outlook, no, this is wrong. As an outlook, additional top priorities of the governing board. And here I made a distinction between governing board and experts. Very important areas for the governing board. Number 1, formative assessment, integrating teacher, peer, and self-assessment. Interestingly, the experts didn't rate this as high as that. I think only 55% mentioned that as a top priority. Increasing motivation to learn languages in addition to English. again, currently, the current program, we do have one project that is looking at LOTE, languages other than English, in the CLIL context and also across educational stages. And it will be very interesting to see how that evolves and how that this topic can be carried forward in the next program. Developing autonomous learning. Again, this was very strongly mentioned just now in the panel. Autonomous learning, analytical and critical thinking skills, how to develop that, how to support that in language classrooms is a top priority, mentioned by the governing board members. Digitalization of assessment practices, again, we've discussed that here, and in-service teacher education for literacy development across all subjects. This was also a topic that we have discussed in various groups, also in the PNF session, how important it is not to stick to the, to your own community, but to make sure to reach out to subject teachers and to people who are responsible for educational provision across all stages and in different sectors. Yes, and that already brings me to a close. And of course, you're welcome to ask questions. I'm coming back to the purpose or to the scenario that I've presented at the beginning. The purpose why, what is the purpose of a new program? Is it just a new program, or does it have a more, let's say, a more concrete raison d'être in a situation that we are looking at? And my proposal is to consider, to look at the program in the context of strengthening language education and its meaning for strengthening democracy. And democracy is a very vague word in a way. It's very abstract, but I think there are very concrete developments that we want to see. We want to see peace in Europe. We want to contribute to a green economy, to social inclusion, and to a democratic culture. And language education has a very important role to play in this context. And therefore, I believe the ECML program can definitely contribute to this process. And that's a message that needs to be conveyed clearly to anybody who says, yeah, languages, that's maybe something I want to look into and work in this area. So I'm counting on your interest. I'm counting on your support for this process. And definitely next year, end of May, please watch out. We'll inform you. We'll, of course, make clear that all our stakeholders are informed. And we are hoping for ideas for projects for the next program. Thank you.
Apparently the camera can't capture me. Thank you. It's been a long, but I believe a very productive day. And the last thing anybody wants is another speech. So it's going to be very short, I promise. I'd like to begin with the thank yous. First of all, to our interpreters. Are they there? They are. To those who have chaired our sessions, to all of our speakers, to our workshop facilitators, and to those of you who've become movie stars and made little videos in the breaks, etc. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to my wonderful team at the ECML. They really are absolutely fantastic. And I'd like to say a very, very special thank you to 3 people. To Adelina, stand up. To Katerina. And to Anya, up we go. And thank you, of course, to all of you for your active participation and all your wonderful ideas. Thank you for your contributions, for demonstrating very clearly, I think, the added value of both RELANG and SMC workshops. I think for me, it was so reassuring to hear that, yes, we've been doing this for a long time, but we need more, and it's been developing in response to real needs on the ground. This idea of this educational literacy, I really think we've got something there that we need to develop further. Bringing about sustainable and transformative change requires the commitment of all players, and the work we do at the ECML, whatever it is we're doing, we offer that unique platform for exchange, for dialogue, for learning, for mediating across linguistic, cultural, sectoral, pedagogical boundaries. And I think for me, that's what makes the beauty of the ECML. Spain, Portugal, Italy, I hope you're listening. I hope you very much enjoyed this event. I hope you've learned something new and are going home tired, I suspect, but inspired. I found it inspiring, and it reminded me of something Oprah Winfrey, the famous American talk show host, said about partnerships. Surround yourself only with the people who are going to take you higher. I could do with some of that. All of you in this room contributing to taking the ECML higher. And for that, I thank you very, very much. And I'm going to change au français. Tout le monde ne fête pas Noël. Et même si vous le fêtez, vous n'échangez pas peut-être forcément des cadeaux le 24 ou le 25 décembre. Il existe également de nombreuses traditions différentes pour marquer le tournant de l'année. Le Nouvel An est également célébré des dates différentes selon les cultures. Tout comme la diversité linguistique, cette diversité de croyances, de traditions et de cultures fait partie de la richesse du patrimoine de l'humanité, de ce qui fait sa beauté. Alors, quelle que soit la signification de cette saison festive pour vous, qu'elle soit remplie de joie, d'espoir et de paix. Profitez du reste de votre séjour à Graz et pour ceux et celles d'entre vous qui partent ce soir ou demain, bon voyage sans délai de retour. Au revoir et merci encore.